So today on Simply Happy Conversations, I have two guests with me. I'm talking with Jacinta and Lachlan, and they're the hosts, of Differently Brained podcast. A Differently Brained podcast is a championing neurodivergent and mental health, and they are building awareness and acceptance. So welcome, Lachlan and Jacinta.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
It's so lovely to have you both. Your podcast, I have enjoyed listening to each of your episodes and just the variety that you have in your episodes, the guests that you have, but then also I really enjoy listening to your individual ones as well when you've shared your own story and your own journey. So maybe just start with sharing a little bit about things that you both like to do when you're not working. And maybe you're like me and you actually love working, so...
Well, neither of us are actually currently in paid work at the moment, so it's a lot of free time, I guess. But outside
podcasting is working.
The podcast is working, yeah.
Outside of the podcast, I do a bit of writing and freelance editing, and a lot of reading and gardening.
Any favorite books? Because you've interviewed a lot of amazing authors on your podcast. Oh. Have you got a favorite book?
It's so hard because I just love so many and I'm reading so often. Ones that I regularly go back to are the K-Kerr books, which is why it was so exciting to have her on the show multiple times. So those are absolute favorites. But one that I've recently read that I really loved was Andromache Between Worlds. So it's a middle grade fantasy, so a bit for kids, but it's still amazing.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Is it the author Australian or overseas?
Yeah, Australian author.
Oh, beautiful. And what about you, Lachlan? What do you like to do when you're not working? Or when you're not doing the podcast?
When I'm not doing the podcast, yes. I like to be your classic millennial nerd where I will play video games and watch television programs and movies and stuff. I also like to read. I play and run RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons occasionally. Jacinta's been in a couple of those games. And also I generally like cooking while drinking wine. That's my favorite thing to do.
What sort of cooking do you like? Is it like savory dishes, sweet dishes?
Yeah,
desserts?
Mostly savory. Like I'll cook like dinners and stuff like that. I like making stuff that's like needlessly complicated a lot of the time just to challenge myself. But yeah.
That's sensory seeking.
Yes.
So tell us about the podcast, how it came about and why you both started the podcast. And is it a year? Did you start it this time last year?
We did, yeah. It's been pretty well a year.
Yeah.
This is a question for you, Jacinta, because you started it, man.
It was something that I'd been thinking about for a while. So when I was looking at getting a diagnosis and just trying to understand, my neurodivergence and things like that, I struggled to find varied experience. So outside of social media, the things that I went to were books and things like that, which were really, really wonderful, but they still only ever really gave me like one neurodivergent character. So I was sinking a lot of time into getting little bits and pieces, which was still really amazing, but I was still only getting snippets of people's story and just one experience. And I was looking for something a bit more varied to kind of learn a bit more because I hadn't decided if I was going to, seek a diagnosis and things like that. And then once I did get a diagnosis, again, I went back to the drawing board of like trying to understand different bits and pieces. And I looked to podcasts, but everything was either similar to the issues I was facing with books where it was one person's story, or it was someone who had lived experience and someone who didn't. And it felt like a kind of a surface level exploration, which was, they were breaking down concepts and terms and things like that, which absolutely has a place and spreads awareness and things like that. But for me, who knew the words and terms now and wanted to understand, how other people live with an autistic brain or an ADHD brain and things like that, I really wanted to hear fuller stories from a lot of different people. And having that overlap, being both an autistic and an ADHDer, I really needed to find multiple stories because everything felt like it was really compartmentalized out. Like I could find autism podcasts, or I could find ADHD podcasts, or I could find, and I wanted to bring it all together because it's not separated for me. It's not compartmentalized. So that was the main reason that I'd been mulling it over, but I wasn't going to do it by myself. And then I may have reached out to Jacinta Lachlan, and yeah, that's how it started. He jumped on board.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to do stuff with podcast. Well, not always. It's a recent fascination of mine, but the idea of doing something that is both an intellectual and a creative output with someone that I know is like, you can't really get any better than that.
Amazing.
Yeah, and also like similarly, I haven't really I don't get a lot out of reading the sort of clinical top-down definitions and accounts of mental health. And
does anyone?
Yeah, well, that's it. And so doing this is like, I didn't really expect to get this particular bit out of it, but I have really kind of expanded my perceptions of neurodivergence and mental health. For example, one of our most recent episodes with Adele Dumont, who wrote The Pulling, which is about having trichotillomania, which I have. I've never really spoken to anyone about that before. And it's just like, without the podcast, I wouldn't really have that opportunity. So in many ways, the podcast is a selfish endeavor for me, but also, it's an output. It's good to be sort of a repository of that information for people. Well, not a repository, like a I don't know, a conveyance method, a vessel for information.
So it's almost like you two are getting like almost like therapy by, chatting to other people with lived experience. And then, but the thing is, the best part is that you're sharing it out in the whole world. And there's people like me who just, started listening, and it's like, oh, I love this. Like I relate to so many parts, especially yours, Jacinta, that you talk about. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yes, that was me type thing. But it's great that you've actually both got the different sort of mental health, aspects to share, which I really enjoy listening, because the same, I didn't know a lot about things that you talk about, Lachlan, and it's like really interesting. I find that really interesting to learn more, especially because I have so many varied clients. A lot are, neurodivergent, but I do have a lot in sort of NDIS field that I work with. So it's great to have that, varied experience to be able to hear from other people. So what about you both? What do you love most? So Lachlan, you sort of shared a little bit, but is there anything else you love about the podcast? Because you do most of the back end, don't you?
Yeah, I do the editing and that kind of thing. And I'll be honest, I find editing to be a double-edged sword. It can be frustrating and at once like really fulfilling, because I've got a product at the end that I've worked on and it's like, it's done and it's out there. And I imagine that would be the same for like making some sort of film or book or whatever. It's that kind of thing. I enjoy speaking to what I think is what you were just saying then, Narelle, about learning things from other people that you wouldn't expect to. I reckon in many ways that Jacinta and I are like audiences of our own podcast. In like, we get the same kind of stimulation, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think that's what I love most about it. And everyone's really nice. Every single person that we've spoken to has just been so nice, and it's great.
That's my hyper focus. I then go on to the what's that? Who's that person? Where's their account? Oh, I've got to get those books. And yeah. What about you, Jacinta? What's the things you love about the podcast?
I think my answer is really similar to Lachlan's, where absolutely it's a selfish endeavor, and we're just really lucky that other people want to listen to it, because it's just so nice having these people where when we reach out and say, hey, do you want to come and talk to us? Like, not only do they say yes, but everyone's been so open and honest and sharing with their time and their resources and their story and things like that. And I've learned so much just from the first year that the fact that, you know, we get to keep going is just so exciting and so lovely. And again, I didn't realize, but I just love talking to people. I think for so long I'd been you know, masking and having, like, you know, obviously a few social difficulties here and there that I thought, you know, oh, I don't like people, you know, blah blah blah. But no, I do like people. I really love talking to people. I just need to know what the conversation's about, or like have a framework for it or a reason. And so, like, you know, actually being interviewed or interviewing people, it's just so nice. It's so
Perfect, isn't it?
satisfying. And yeah, like Lachlan said, everyone's been so nice, and we've got to talk to so many people that I admire. It's just been so special.
Yeah. And I love that, like that like how you've just pointed out. It's such a great point of there is the questions. I'd never thought of that. And then maybe that's why I love doing it, because there's a structure, isn't there? There's a structure to follow. And so the conversation can flow. So then would you like to start, Jacinta, and tell us about your like neurodivergent story and, you know, being formally identified as neurodivergent?
Yeah, of course. So I'm one of those late diagnosed women, which I think, you know, that's pretty standard these days, where, you know, I went through primary school and high school and didn't really know anything. I was always super into school because I loved the structure and the routine, and all of that. And I loved most of the subjects that I did. Now looking back, we've found my report cards and we've identified like 50% of my subjects were Jacinta's a pleasure to have in class, and the other 50% were Jacinta could be really great if she just applied herself. Jacinta shows so much potential. Jacinta needs to stop distracting others. And I'm like, oh, there it was. So yeah, but there'd always been kind of like a running joke in my family that I was the one to jump to logic when there was like a big emotional moment, but then other things would set me off super emotionally, and I'm not touchy-feely, and all these kind of bits and pieces that then when I started to read, it was Kay Kerr's books, essentially, YA from an autistic author, I was like, oh, because the only representations I'd seen was, you know, like Sheldon Cooper and autistic coded males generally that really fit the cliche or the stereotype. So then once I started to see representation that actually fit, I was like, oh my gosh, got on social media, started looking it up. And then I was really, really lucky where it was before COVID and I got into my psychiatrist really quickly. I know that my diagnosis journey is very, very different and very privileged compared to, you know, a lot of people. But I went in saying, hey, I think I'm autistic. And I had like a 3-page, 10 size font Microsoft Office doc being like, these are all the things that I do. And I thought I was going in just for being autistic, but then she sent me home with a bunch of ADHD screening tools as well. And it turns out I got the double whammy. So yeah, that was it. And then it's, just been a kind of understanding journey, an unmasking journey, a figuring out what works for me journey, which has been just wonderful, honestly. I wouldn't change it for the world. I love now that I have autistic and ADHD are as labels, because the labels that I used to get and used to give myself were much less nice. So
definitely. And how funny, they almost need the ADHD testing and autism testing should be, if they bring in 10 pages about everything about themselves, okay, tick, they're possibly autistic and ADHD, and maybe they took ages to actually then get to the appointment or fill in the form that you sent. That could be just the criteria, really, couldn't it?
I have asked my psych since then. I was like, oh, were there any like early signs from our first one? And she was like, yeah, you brought in like a deep dive, like you brought in a portfolio. Most people, most people who self-identify more often than not come out with a confirmed identity, because no one's going to deep dive on a thing that they probably don't have. You know what I mean? They're going to find a thing, be like, that's not me, and move on. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, cool.
I hear that from so many of my clients and people I've met, that the same thing. They go, well, I did have this big portfolio that I took in, and they went straight away, yeah, okay, this is already heading down that. And what about you, Lachlan? Do you want to share your mental health journey?
Yeah. My mental health journey is like drawn out over a long period of time, because it's kind of like I've accrued different things over the years. So it started out just like anxiety, that was the diagnosis, because I think, you know, a lot of people in school, which is when I was diagnosed, have got anxiety or experience anxiety in some form or another. And then that was then diagnosed as depression, because it was like a comorbidity, really. And then after that, I was having, you know, all sorts of mood swings, and I had a psychotic episode at one point, a really short and not very intense one, but it was still uncomfortable. And I realized as well that I was getting sort of a little bit on the upper, like a little bit overstimulated, I guess. And that's when I went to a psychiatrist, and he said, "What's your family history?" And I said, "Well, my older brother's got bipolar disorder, and my auntie's got bipolar disorder, and my uncle's got bipolar disorder." And it's just like, yeah, you probably have bipolar disorder. And so I got prescribed lithium and been having that. But that was about, I want to say 8 or so years ago. And then on top of that, the other thing, the most recent and probably most annoying of the things is the trichotillomania, the hair pulling.
Yeah.
That one, I honestly, like, I can't pinpoint how that kind of began. It just kind of did. I started pulling my hair out. It started getting worse over time. And and I saw my GP about it finally, and he told me the diagnosis of trichotillomania, which is good to have in some respects, but it's very different, my situation, to Jacinta's, where the labels are affirming. Mine, I don't care. I don't having trichotillomania is annoying and embarrassing, and I hate it. Having bipolar disorder is just like, I don't really get into it that much. And when things do go wrong, which they do, I'm able to draw a connection and say, yep, that's that thing that's happening. And then just kind of like sit with it. Sometimes I don't. But yeah, I guess it's not really a journey, is it? That was more of a checklist of things.
But it's that's what I think is really nice, how you've both got your own, you know, stories that help for other people to go, oh, it's not just like neurodivergence and that's it. It's like, here's the other parts, because some of it does cross over, doesn't it? Or I have definitely heard of females being diagnosed with bipolar, but then actually, as they work it out, it's like, no, actually it's not. It was autism seems to be a likely thing. So I think it's really nice how you both have your areas that you bring in to talk about, and can converse with your guests that's come on as well.
Thank you. I feel like we really did need to cover a scope in us as hosts to be able to then go and, you know, ask people for their stories. So it's nice to hear that it works.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's great. So what about some of the misconceptions that you come across with mental health and neurodivergence, like in your own lives, or even through your work that you've been doing?
Oh, sorry.
I don't mind.
You said, Lachlan, so I thought you were going.
Yeah, I'm having a think.
He's thinking.
I think the biggest one is still that, you know, the research and the diagnostic criteria and things like that are still so narrow for what it actually looks like. And I think, you know, I understand that stereotypes and cliches are around for a reason and things like that, but I think that that's a huge misconception and a misunderstanding of how autism and ADHD, you know, can present and how it can look for different people, both externally and internally. I think, you know, that's a big one. The whole laziness situation across both neurodivergence and mental health is such a huge one that, you know, people are just lazy. It's not real. There's just so much energy going into other things that you don't see, that, you know, the expectations that you think people should be hitting, just Yeah, that's a big one for me. The societal expectations of just because someone thinks you should be doing something doesn't mean that you have to, and it's okay if you need to do something else.
And I suppose for you too, like growing up and like masking like myself, and then you get to this age and you're like, I don't have to. And like for me, some people go, but you used to do that all the time. And I was like, yeah. And then I'd be so exhausted. And now I have 2 kids that I have to, cope with. I need to think about my energy. I can't just keep doing what I used to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't like think about it at the time, but every day after high school, I would come home and I would fall asleep. Every single day, I would have an afternoon nap. I know that teenagers are meant to sleep a lot, but like we went to doctors being like, she's fatigued all the time. And it 100% would have been the amount of masking and regulation I was doing by myself that, now it's just, I just can be me.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good.
That's similar in a way with like in terms of like energy levels and the misconception of laziness, because what I've found is that I will internalize those kinds of misconceptions and criticisms and use that as ammunition for depression, right? So I use that as sort of a means to further punch myself down into the whatever hole I find myself in. And the reason why that happens is because it's such a prevalent thing still in wider society. Yes, it's getting better, but it still lingers. It's still kind of like, it's still very much the default to see someone who is depressed and tell them to kind of like, oh, well, maybe you should do this. Maybe you should get a job and it'll fulfill you. Or maybe you should go outside and walk. It's like, yeah, okay, those things might and do help, but it's not really hearing that from someone else. I personally, that doesn't work for me. Like I need to come to that to my own and instead have people like help supporting me in the space that I'm in at the time.
It's also not always accessible. It's such a privilege to be able to look after your mental health and have accommodations for your neurodivergence and things like that. Like it's still something that I think isn't taken seriously, and there is still a lot of personal responsibility around a lot of these things that are social issues, basically. Absolutely, the internalized stigma it's deep. It's deep in the differently brained team for sure, and elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely, isn't it? And it will be interesting to see what this next generation, the younger generation who have grown up, with a diagnosis from when they were really young and don't know anything different. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing that compared to how I've grown up anyway, until I was like, what, 40, I don't know, 46 or something, I think it was. So yeah. So then tell us, what about at an individual level and a community level? What can we do then around changing these stigmas and the misconceptions?
Just piggybacking off what I said, like I think it would be nice if on an individual level, if I am in a state, if I'm in a depressed state, for like an individual who might come upon me to just kind of not try to fix me in that moment, just kind of be there and understand and support, all that kind of stuff. And then from a societal level, it really kind of becomes, and I'm sure that this is going to be a similar answer for you, Jacinta. It's almost like a restructuring of how we view concepts such as laziness or disruptiveness or output, that kind of stuff. Because at the moment, it seems to be focused more on the condition, like the mental illness of a neurodivergence, which is not something that can necessarily be changed. And everything else around it, all of the systems can be changed. It's just that no one really wants to do it. So yeah.
Yes,
how
like
you
schools.
do that? Yeah, exactly. And how you do that, I don't know. There are people much smarter than me who have worked on doing exactly that. But I think maybe like at the very least, recognizing that those systems can change, and my headphones just disconnected.
No, they're back.
Those systems can change, and people are working to change them, and to just let it happen. Be receptive to that potentially happen. That's my answer.
And now you just reminded me of the politician from WA that you've had on twice, and I absolutely loved those episodes because, and everyone, I'll definitely link those in the show notes, because I think that was really great to hear, like, positive change and someone out there trying to really, you know, make a big change. What about you, Jacinta? What do you think at an individual or a community level can we do?
At an individual level, I think it's, you know, engaging in content and learning more and just coming to a better understanding of people around you. I think, you know, it's a bit like previous social movements that have happened where people don't realize who is in their life, but the likelihood that you have someone in your life that is neurodivergent or struggles with their mental health, it's so likely. It's so, you know, just because you don't think you do, just because you don't see them, that doesn't mean that, you know, you shouldn't be learning about these things and engaging with lived experience people and speakers and things like that, because you probably most likely do. And, you know, hearing other people's stories is never a bad thing. Growing your empathy and your understanding for someone else's journey is never a bad thing. So on an individual level, I think it's taking responsibility to continue learning about something that you maybe don't know about, because, you know, there is more representation and it is getting there, but sometimes you still do need to go out of your way to find, you know, autistic content or ADHD content or, you know, wider neurodivergent and mental health content. And then on a community level, you probably notice it's a big thing for me, but representation. Like, if I hadn't have come across that stuff, I wouldn't have known, and my life could be very, very different because it was not going nicely. So I think, you know, listening to people, you know, at the moment, I'm not sure when this episode comes out, but at the moment we have people going through a girl's diary because she took her own life, and they're trying to find the clues and things like that. And that focus in the media, I understand why it's happening, but you don't need to wait. It's too late now for that individual, and that is awful. But like, listen to us now, because there are so many of us waving the flag, throwing up our banner, throwing up our hand, saying we're here to help, we want to co-design with you, we want to share our lived experience, we want to do that. We're not hard to find, and it feels like there has to be a tragedy before anything is done, and then it's still not an effective solution or supports or accommodations and things like that. So I think at a community level, it really needs to be bring us in, and, you know, on a capitalism commercial community level, it's put us in your shows, put us in your books, put us in your music, put us in everything where everyone else is, because you can't be what you can't see. And if you aren't seeing it, instead you're going to self-stigmatize, you're going to internalize all of that ableism and feel probably pretty awful about yourself.
Oh, I love that. I love that quote that you've just said. That's, yeah, amazing.
Thank you.
So for you, how can people, and look, you two are a very prime example. You're doing an amazing job by getting your voices out there, sharing your lived experience, but finding other people and sharing that on the podcast, which also feeds through to social media. And like this, I just wanted to get you both on to go, here's another two people who are doing an amazing job, and there's more role models, more role models for the younger generation, which I think we need more of, especially in schools, being, you know, a background in education. I think that's really important.
Thank you so much. Oh my God,
Gosh.
Lachlan and I, we still get super weird when we get compliments, especially when we get called big things like role models.
Role
like,
model?
oh, what?
Yes, definitely role models.
I'll take it.
So how can people connect with you?
The best way to probably, many ways, the best way to probably get on to us is we have our own private Facebook group now, the Differently Brained community. So you just come on, and that's generally where we are most active, where, you know, we're asking questions and we're finding out what episodes people want to hear, and we're just celebrating, like, you know, the wins of the week and sharing news articles and things like that. Otherwise, we are on Instagram. We're not as active there, but I'm getting better. We have a few reels about our mental health walks and whatnot. And then also we have a website, differentlybrained.com.
Oh, beautiful. So there might be someone listening who may even want to be potentially a guest on your show as well, and they can reach out to you as well.
Absolutely. There's a form in our Facebook group so that I can keep it all in one
Oh.
place. So come join the Facebook group and then just fill in like a 2-second form, and yeah, you can come chat with us.
Perfect. And I will include all that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time and both of you sharing your knowledge and your story as well. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Jacinta and Lockie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.